Good morning, everyone, and welcome. My name is Blair Embry. I'm the communications manager for Prison Yoga Project, and we are absolutely honored here today to be hosting Campbell Lillard. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, of course.
So our topic today is mentorship and belonging. I'm really excited to get into this topic of belonging. And I'll read a little bit about Campbell, and then we'll dive into a centering opportunity. Campbell Lillard has been working in both the fitness and nonprofit industries since 2018 after serving a 10-year sentence in Texas State Prison. During his incarceration, Campbell realized that there was a lot about himself that he did not like. However, training showed him that he could change if he set an intention and applied work. This realization led him on an obsessive quest to become the best version of himself through intentional stress and challenge. Today, Campbell is using his unique life experiences to connect and empower others. His mission is to help people discover their inner strength and support their journey of becoming the fullest expression of themselves. Beautiful. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
So, I feel inspired to lead a centering opportunity that really embeds us in this understanding and feeling of belonging. Maybe you're seated, maybe you're laying down, but I invite you to find a lengthening of the spine, if that's accessible for you. And immediately when I find some lengthening in the spine, my body wants to take a big inhale and a big exhale. So let's take a couple moments to just bring our attention to our breath, and the natural rhythm of your breath is perfect. Maybe your eyes are open or closed. A few more intentional breaths. And where I feel like I would love us to start is finding a connection to the earth. So maybe you're on the 5th floor of an office building. Maybe you're listening to this in your car. Maybe you're at your house. But see if you can create an energetic anchor into the earth. Maybe starting from your belly button, driving deep down into your body, into the earth. Allowing this rope or this cord to find the magma, the bright, hot magma of the center of the earth. And once you've found this place, pull or bring that energy up through the cord back into our body, anchoring ourselves into time and space here on our precious planet. And let's extend our understanding of belonging. First, let's start with our neighbors, our actual physical neighbors. Maybe you can start thinking of your neighborhood and all of the people around you that have this same anchor, this place of our birth. And maybe you can expand it to the whole city that you're in. Seeing and feeling that everyone on this planet shares the same experience of belonging to this place. And maybe we can expand this to a state if we're in the United States, or maybe we can expand this to the whole country. and allow this expansive understanding of belonging to wrap around the entire earth. And tying this back together to our breath. That our breath is the shared experience of life. We can sit here for a few more breaths, embodying this understanding of belonging. And I want and feel called to invite another specific group that we support and part of our community, reaching beyond the barriers that have been created by people. I also want to call into the room all of our participants from all around the world that are currently incarcerated, that are part of this community, that are part of this deep and inherent sense of belonging. A few more breaths here. You can bring this practice to a close. Maybe you're bringing your eyes open, shifting your gaze back to the screen, and bringing ourselves back in to this time and space together. Thank you all for joining us in this centering opportunity. Thank you, Campbell, for being here. What's your first memory of mindfulness?
So most of my early life, I tried to not be mindful. I tried to hide from the world and hide from myself and hide from feelings. And that looked like in my earliest life, as soon as I had control over this or some decision-making powers, it looked like getting out of the house, like going in the street. It looked like going to my homeboys' houses and other people's places where I could just forget and be with another group of people where there was some sort of sense of belonging. Later on, it looked like lots of drug use. Later on, it looked like lots of violence. But I have a distinct recollection I was in a lot of older prisons in Texas. So just think media is never reality, but you can kind of imagine old prison movies that take place in the South or whatever with cells that are in that kind of style. Those units were very loud, and rambunctious is a word that might describe it well. And I remember having to try to tune that out to start to sit with myself. And I just remember focusing on my breath without any guidance or experience or knowledge, and just intuition. And that would be my first memory of a mindfulness practice.
Mm-hmm. Do you have a specific memory that you bring yourself back to of when you were trying to quiet the outside world and pay attention inside?
It's non-specific, and I would say that prison is a lot of monotony. It's a lot of the same thing over and over, interspaced with periods of short bursts of time that are filled with a lot going on quickly. But I do have this recollection. Again, it feels non-specific, of me sitting on a bunk, trying to just be with myself and sit with myself at some point in my journey through prison or my time in prison. I realized that I was going to have to start sitting with myself to be comfortable with myself and be comfortable in my own skin. I just, almost have this like third person view of me sitting on a bunk, trying to focus on my breath and nothing else.
Mhm. Thank you. You opened us up a little bit to your childhood, but will you tell us more about some of your early childhood experiences?
Yeah, my childhood maybe that painted a picture that was untrue. I had a pretty decent childhood. My mom was a teacher, single mom, worked a lot, did really well for me, like sacrificed a lot. But I never felt like I belonged. She couldn't have kids, and I was adopted. Um, there was like always a sense of me not feeling at home, or she came from a really traumatic background, so me not feeling like I had a family. And I believe, or I have the perception that my like arrival into the streets, or my trying to leave the home, was because I didn't feel like I really belonged there, or had a space, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. So, this idea of not feeling like you belonged, and then you are starting to look externally for belonging. What did that journey look like?
Yeah, it looked like me seeking out places where I could get recognition. So I was always like the kid in the street that was like, yo, I'll do this. I'll do this smash and grab. Like, I'm down to do this. Like, I'm down to go like ride with the big homie while he steals the car. And that gave me this thing that I in school, I never felt smart. I was never led to believe that I was smart. So maybe I would have sought recognition if that had been different in academics, but it just wasn't the case. But when when I went on a mission, or like did a thing, I was the guy. And so I really enjoyed that feeling, and it made me feel like I had a home, and it made me feel like I had people that care about me. And obviously, in the course of this conversation, like we understand that that's not true. But at the time, I didn't realize that to be true.
It felt true to you. If like I'm visualizing that you had praise and you had comfort and you had community and you had people.
Yeah, and it felt great, and it felt warm, and it felt like, I went from being this person who was very much dissatisfied with himself and who he was, and I got these like short bursts, these like tiny moments of recognition and validation, and I felt like, oh, like I'm actually like important, like I'm somebody after all.
Mhm. And this led to you being incarcerated for 10 years in Texas. Will you share some of your experience or what happened when you were incarcerated?
Yeah, for sure. And maybe context is important here. And I don't want to, sometimes these questions can feel like you're walking on eggshells or whatever. But I was incarcerated on a 10-year sentence for a string of aggravated robberies. As uh, part of my life to kick in dope houses and rob dope dealers. And that's just like how I made a living for myself, how I experienced life at the time. And that had obvious consequences, and I knew that's where I was going, but I didn't really care. And everybody around me was going there or had been there, and it just almost felt, I don't like the word predestined or fate, or never really have, but it just like felt like this path that was laid out for me. It felt like what I was supposed to do. And so running the streets, I thought I was bad. I thought I was like doing my thing. I thought I was on top of the world. And then I got incarcerated, and I was maybe 100 pounds soaking wet, addicted to heroin. And I was met with my mentor would call it disconfirming information. So I thought I was like of this elevated status. And then my first fight in jail was for the right to eat the trays that were slid into the housing pod. And I obviously like lost that fight because I was in a bad way. But I was unwilling to not be afforded the right to eat. Um, and I was obviously in a predicament where something had to change. And so much of my very early incarceration was this process of becoming physically able to navigate my environment, and becoming physically able to do things like sit at the table and not have to sit on the floor, and be able to eat the food that was slid into the pod. And I wish this had been a shorter time period for me, but it was like several years where my only focus was like survival and kind of getting my feet up under me and learning to navigate this new environment. And that was very much what my early years of incarceration were.
And thank you for sharing too, because I want to give autonomy, right? And you share what you feel comfortable sharing. How was getting sober in prison?
It was hard and it happened right away. Anything that I could get in my early incarceration, I just used, and it's like the pills that came in with the nurse and like the things that were brought in. And that's because I was really uncomfortable. And especially in jail, I was facing a lot of time and I was a young kid. And at that point in time, I was facing my first offer was for longer than I had been alive. So I just like didn't know what I was going to do. It felt like almost literally like the end of the world or the end of very real and also very far away at the same time. It felt like something that I just like couldn't felt like something very not tangible, but very imminent and very, very real and very present at the time. Um, and then slowly, you know, everybody's recovery looks different, everybody's use looks different. But drug use for me slowly filtered out because it became less and less in alignment with who I wanted to be as a person. On the streets, I had this fantasy or false reality of being really in control, of having a lot of autonomy. And that was not true. That was objectively not true. And inside of jail and prison, being out of control was less acceptable to me. The consequences were different being out of control in prison than they were on the streets. And so as a result, I just drank less, used less, et cetera, until one day I found myself in a very real situation the last time I used, and I realized that I really didn't like the person who I was, and I realized substances made me do things that were very unaligned with who I wanted to be, and I realized I was around a lot of people who obviously have less control of this in prison, but I was around a lot of people who I didn't want to be around. I almost had this, whatever, I hate to use like a dogmatic term, but I had a spiritual experience where I recognized that this wasn't me anymore and I needed to change.
Hmm. Profound. How old were you when you were first system impacted?
I was 18.
18.
And I did some like very brief stints in the juvenile justice system and like juvenile probation and stuff like that. But let's just say like 18 was when that like world became real for me.
While you were incarcerated, did you have access to programming?
Not a lot. Texas is a funny place. So there's like a lot of, here's, a tangent that will maybe make this feel more concrete for people who are listening in. In Texas, one of the most popular programs is this HVAC trade, so heating and air conditioning. And in Texas, there's also a state law that you can't perform facilitating these programs for facilitating this trade school, but it's very hard to actually like take that and utilize it once you're out of prison. And Texas has many programs like that. There is a college system. I was enrolled in college 3 times, but I was kicked out 3 times for fighting. When I was incarcerated, I was somewhat different from a lot of people I knew, because a lot of people become really focused on parole and the date that they're eligible. And in some ways that incentivizes really good behavior. But my perception was that it made people really fixated on a certain date. And then when they didn't get the answer that they wanted, their life kind of fell apart, or their willpower fell apart, or they lost control mentally. And so I went in with the mind frame of, I've got a 10-year sentence. I'm going to do the entire thing. I'm going to get good at prison. I'm going to get really comfortable. I'm going to make a name for myself. And I was also, I don't want to take ownership away from myself, or like dodge accountability here, but I was a young kid, small, and so to make a name for myself and get comfortable, violence had to become a part of my world, and that just meant that I was less a part of general population and things like programs and things like education, and I spent more time in disciplinary status, administrative segregation, closed custody, medium custody, etc.
Well, you're so young to be 18 with other likely full-grown men or people that had been inside for a long time or people that began incarceration later in life. So I can absolutely understand your need or this felt sense that you need to protect yourself. And that is how you went about protecting yourself.
Yeah, it served a purpose at the time. The way that I lived served a purpose at a time until it didn't.
So you did 10 years in Texas. What did your life look like when you got out?
I was really, really fortunate, and I don't think we would be having this conversation without it. 2 years before my release, my dad contacted me and wanted to get back in touch with me. And I paroled to his house, and I was there for several months before I got housing on my own. So like really fortunate to be in a situation where, it's common that when you get out of prison, you're just immediately faced with like all these problems and all these bills. And that was much less true for me. My two options before then, and I really didn't know what I was going to do, would have been to go to somewhere like the Salvation Army or to parole to my homie's house. And that was just like I was gonna be handed a quarter pound of dope and a pistol, and that was gonna be a bad scene. Even if I didn't want to go that way, like sometimes, economically people have very little choice. Like again, you've got a housing bill, you've got a phone bill, you got to figure out transportation, and so that can be difficult. I was fortunate not to have to worry about those problems, and I was afforded the opportunity to kind of get my feet up on me first when I got out.
That is incredible. So you're talking about all these bills and everything, and then you don't have access to jobs. You don't have an opportunity to work, or your opportunities are much smaller
Yeah,
because you just got out of prison.
I don't know how true this is because my experience is my own experience, but for a long time it felt like I interviewed for more jobs than anybody I know. I applied for three. I like a very vivid memory of applying for three car washes that paid under the table, under minimum wage, and I was denied at all of them. I was riding my bike all around. I'm from Dallas, all around Dallas, getting turned down. I got a job at Sam's and I got a job at Home Depot, and then they came back and told me, "Oh, we ran your record." And those are allegedly fair chance employers that only go back 7 years on records, but like in reality, that's not what happens.
I'm sorry that happened.
Yeah, but I mean, it's an opportunity. If that hadn't, if finding a job wouldn't have been so difficult, I wouldn't have, by necessity, been forced to work in my passion and live my passion.
Yeah, let's get into it. So, mentorship and belonging, and you're part of this amazing, you're a co-founder of this community and DEUCE Gym. Will you tell us the story of how you found this community?
For sure. So my passion, one of my passions is human movement and strength and conditioning. I mentioned earlier that upon my early incarceration, I just had no control of my body. I didn't like who I was. I was like faced with this very immediate physical situation. And for most of my life, I um, just whether through my environment and through information that I took in and the way that I saw the world, I thought that people couldn't get better at things, that people just kind of were who they were. And I know we've all heard that cute story about Michael Jordan getting cut from his basketball team. And like, yeah, I watched Space Jam growing up, and that just didn't seem real to me. I just like had this sense that Michael Jordan was born as Michael Jordan. And people that were really good at things, like great musicians, were like just great musicians. And people that were great writers were just like great writers. And that's how people who were great leaders were born great leaders. They didn't have to develop that quality. And then there was me, and I just like kind of wasn't shit. And those were the cards that life had dealt me, and I was going to do the best with those that I could. And then again, because of the immediacy of my environment, um, I started to do push-ups and work the pads, and then I could do more push-ups and less fights. And that was a very powerful thing to me. So I became obsessed with physiological adaptation or physical change. And I learned that I could make myself into a different person. And it wasn't immediate and it wasn't easy, but the journey of that was very worthwhile. And so movement became a passion of mine. I didn't have access to a lot of great information, but I learned, like we've all learned, to do the things that we're great at. I learned through a lot of mistakes. And so before my release, I was sitting in administrative segregation. And just for context, that means that you're in a box by yourself all day long, almost every day for 23 hours a day. Some days you get to come out to a slightly larger box and you're still by yourself. But the environment is still violent. You still have people trying to like spear you through the bars, and there's like all kinds of stuff going on. And people that have been there will understand what that environment is. I had a friend who was released before me, and he asked me what I wanted to do when I got out, and he had gone to the oil fields and been pretty successful. And he invited me there, and I said, man, I really don't think that that's what I want to do. So I had the knowledge to know, I knew enough about myself to know that I wouldn't be happy there. And I had this sense that like a lot of the problems in my life happened because I wasn't happy or fulfilled with myself or with what I was doing. I mean, the only thing I loved to do in prison, other than politic, was to train and read. And so I was like, well, maybe I could be a personal trainer or a coach. And I asked him for a couple books that I had heard about, and he sent me these books and I just devoured them. And so I had the idea, okay, when I get out, I'm going to find a gym and I'm going to somehow convince them into getting me a job. And I'm going to like read all the books that I can and do a thing. And I was fortunate enough I knocked on a lot of doors, and I was fortunate enough to knock on one gym door, and the owner decided to give me a chance and take me in, sleep on the gym floor and clean their equipment in exchange for membership. And the coaches there taught me how to coach, and I started to build a whole new life.
Incredible. I would love to hear about the internal journey that was happening while you're building building external strength. What was the journey inside like?
Yeah, I mean, I got stronger on the outside, but I was still very scared, very uncomfortable with myself, very afraid to love myself or offer myself love, very dissatisfied with who I was. And those things, maybe this is an unpopular statement, but those things did begin to change when my physical body began to change. As I got confidence externally, I developed confidence internally. And then once I realized that with work and intention, I could change things about myself, I realized like, oh, fuck, I can change things about myself spiritually and emotionally as well. And I could like start to think differently, and I could start to apply other forms of work. And again, I wish like the first time I did push-ups that it just made me never lose a fight again, or the first time I worked the pads. That's not true. And internal work works the same way. So it's a very long, slow process, again, fraught with like many mistakes.
Well, and you're speaking so much to change, right? Like change is difficult, and I can see that you understood or felt like that there was this barrier there, like, oh, I'm actually not capable of changing. Or you had a story that you're like, oh, okay, I am born this way. Michael Jordan is born this way, that there's no possible way that I can change. And then your physical reality informed and opened up this understanding of that you can change.
Yeah, exactly.
How did you end up in LA?
I ended up in LA. I like backpedal for a second.
Yeah.
So this gym that I was in Dallas absolutely changed my life. And I was fortunate to have the best mentors there with the biggest heart. And I've worked in very few industries, so I can't speak to how others are. But in the fitness industry, strength and conditioning industry, there's this very common phenomenon where people reach a certain level and then plateau, where professionals reach a certain level and plateau, where they become good enough. And because I knew the only option available to me other than to live my dream was to die in a box or on the streets, I just kind of refused to plateau. I just refused to stop. And so I began seeking out mentors that could teach me more. I was hadn't had a name for it before about this point in my journey, but became really obsessed with personal development and professional development. And there's very few institutions in the strength and conditioning industry that are relentlessly dedicated to growth on the professional side of things. And everyone that I could find, I sent a DM to, an email, and two wrote me back. And one organization that wrote me back is a gym that I now have equity in Venice, DEUCE Gym. And the founder of that gym sent me some free information and education that he had written and said, "Hey, I hope you make it out here, and I hope you keep in contact with me." And every time he would give me advice, or every time I would take one of his courses, I felt like this guy was magic because I learned a ton and became a different version of myself. I became better. I made more money when I applied the ideas that he gave me. And so I decided that, like, I'm really not going to be satisfied until I make it to Los Angeles. And for those of you who are unaware, Los Angeles is a very expensive city, and it's hard to make it in. And so it wasn't just a thing that I was immediately able to do. But I reached a point in my career where I became comfortable enough to move to LA and make some sacrifices and take an internship at the gym.
What happened next?
Yeah, so it's hard. I would love to say that I got there and people were just like, "Great, you're hired. This is how it works." But we have a very specific, very rigid developmental program that has certain phases, and I had to make it through that program, and I had to be embarrassed as a coach in front of the room, and I had to learn from failure, and I had to take responsibility. We say on the for-profit side of DEUCE and the nonprofit side as well that leadership or responsibility isn't something that we give, it's something that you earn. And so I had to earn that responsibility, and I had to put in a lot of work on the front end until I was a four.
Sorry, you cut out on my end. Can you say that again one more time?
So I had to continually take more responsibility and ownership inside of the organization and inside of DEUCE until I got to the position I'm at today. And one thing that any attrition that we see on the professional side of the organization is because it's hard and because people want to reach a point where they plateau. The best thing in the world about the job I have today is that it's always hard. And the worst thing I have in the world about the job I have today is that it's always hard. But that means that I continually get to grow. I have to earn that though.
Hmm. Will you tell us about DEUCE Gym?
Absolutely. So DEUCE Gym is located on an intersection in Venice, Rose and Lincoln. It's a really peculiar place. Externally, it's got this gritty vibe. We call it the yard, and it very much looks like a yard. It's situated in an old garage that's mostly outdoors and has like a rusty gate around it. There's some implements in the gym that for sure appear intimidating, like Atlas stones, so big balls of concrete, kegs. You've got people with their shirt off, like lifting heavy things in the middle of it. There's a iconic sign that's like an old piece of driftwood into which is carved "motivated people only" at the gate. An environment like this was something that like really appealed to me. It's almost like this fantastical version of a prison yard with people who are trying to make themselves better, not worse. And it's one of the things I was obsessed with about this gym is you have a ton of people who are pushing their edges. Like we call it edge work at the gym, who people are working really hard to express the best version of themselves. And on the yard, in a lot of ways, that looks like the pursuit of some sort of physical practice. And that's really not what it's about. We have lots of people who come to the gym who never work out. In fact, we've got a sign on the yard that says you don't have to work out to kick it. And we've got a picnic table where people will sometimes come, bring their laptops and do work and just sit outside in the California sun. I'm sorry you cut out for a second. Did you?
No, no problem. I don't know if it's the rain. Sorry, the internet's not super great here. So the last thing I heard you say was hang in the California sun.
Yeah, so people will come there and you might assume, you might drive by, it's on a very busy street. So you might assume that everybody that trains here is just an asshole and a meathead and only cares about physical performance, aesthetics, etc. But it's actually a place where we love to have deep conversations and where people will come just to have conversations or a cup of coffee and not to train.
Amazing. So you have the DEUCE community. So you have people that are previously incarcerated coming and joining this community, right? And you have membership and you have mentorship and you have paid internships. Tell us about the framework and maybe how someone could get involved, or what's the journey of this gym?
Absolutely. So the gym started with the same basic premise that the nonprofit started with. And that's that we believe that all people have unrealized potential. That's me, that's you, that's everybody on this call, that's everybody like outside the window, on the street, that's the guy in the alley. We all believe that we could be a fuller version of ourselves. And we also believe that the most potential, the most fulfillment in life lies in pushing the space where we are, where we stand today, and that space where we want to be. And we know that we'll never really get there, and that's okay, but it's not about the destination. I was having a conversation with another coach the other day, and they were asking, well, what's the thing that I should do to be better? And it was like a group conversation, and the consensus was, well, it doesn't really matter. And we just picked a really arbitrary example. And that was a 3.5 times body weight deadlift, which, if you're not familiar with, would be a remarkable feat and would take probably 10 years, 8 training. And we gave the example that if you trained for this, you would have to become a different person. You'd have to become obsessed with this goal. But if on the day that you had peaked for that level of expression, that very high level of performance, you walked up to the bar and set up the thing that you had practiced for 10 years, and you grabbed the bar and it didn't move, it actually wouldn't matter at all whether that bar moved or not. It would be, you would still be a different person. And the work that you put in over that 10-year period, that's what would have made the difference, not your ability to lift the barbell off the ground or not. And so we really believe that that's true, and we really focus in on process rather than outcome at the gym and on the nonprofit. We also realize that, and this is largely due to the fact that Venice is a very different place than it used to be. It's become very gentrified. It has a very economically successful social demographic. And so we would say that like everybody can achieve the best version of themselves. And then that really didn't feel true, because everybody that trained there drove a Tesla and it's looked a certain way. And we recognized, and this is largely through my personal experience and other people in the organization, that individuals who are system, substance, and housing impacted, that they're denied an opportunity to reach this peak level of expression, or as we sometimes say, they're denied a seat at the table. And this seems kind of silly to us for a couple of reasons. One, because we're actual human beings. And two, because why would a business, we're very interested in business at DEUCE. Why would a business shut its doors to people in the room who were the hungriest, the most driven, the most dedicated, had from opportunity? It just seems like a poor way to run an operation. And so we wanted to kind of like flip that model upside down and give the most motivated people more opportunity and more chance to realize their potential. And so anyone who's interested that falls in that demographic, and we're pretty loose about that, like you don't have to fill a questionnaire out, you don't have to do an application, can participate in any one of our programs. And some of those programs look like a partnership with the Phoenix, for example, where you can participate in free strength and conditioning activities. Some of these programs look like some community gardens that we're starting. Some of these programs look like community dinners that we host at our housing facility, trash cleanup. So very low barrier to entry stuff. You basically just gotta show up to a thing, and there's several things you can show up to a week. And some people just want to be here and live here, and that's great, and like do the free thing and be a part of the community. Naturally, you'll have some individuals at those events who want to take more responsibility. We mentioned earlier taking more responsibility to grow in leadership. And to those people, we begin to offer mentorship that looks more direct and more one-on-one. And we begin to give those individuals access to free educational programs that are normally sold for a cost on the for-profit side of our business. But we believe in those people and want to invest in them. And we realize that they don't have the resources to purchase those things. So we give them to them for free. And then some of those people continue to take those opportunities. And then we'll offer them an unpaid internship either in business. The gym has several ancillary businesses around it, like a marketing agency where they can intern. So it's not just, you don't have to be a meathead to be involved in our programs. Some of those people want to be strength and conditioning coaches, and that's great. And we speak the language of movement really well. And even those individuals who aren't interested in being strength and conditioning coaches, we encourage them to enter that journey, because to stand at the front of the room in front of a group of people who are interested in change, but not interested in the science of strength and conditioning, you would have to be able to have empathy for everybody in the room, for a diverse group of individuals. You would have to be able to articulate complex concepts really well in a simple way. You would have to be well on your way to mastery in a craft that's difficult and typically doesn't pay a lot of money, especially at the beginning. You'd have to be really focused on process. And if all of these things were true about yourself, there's just a whole lot that you could do. You wouldn't need to be, people that reach the highest level of our organizations as a coach have a lot of options because of skills that transfer to anything that they want to do.
Amazing. I love everything that your organization and gym does. And I feel like we've kind of like danced around it, but why has mentorship been so important to you?
Yeah, absolutely. Because it absolutely changed my life. I used to say that I never had a positive mentor until that point where I reached that gym in Dallas. And the guy that I apologize for not like directly shouting him out earlier. His name's John Mariotti, and the gym is CrossFit Odyssey. And he's this cantankerous old Italian man who owned a dojo for many years and then got into the sport of and he gave me an opportunity and was just like, had the toughest exterior, but the deepest and most genuine heart. And if he hadn't have taken a chance on me, no one else in the world would have. And he would acknowledge this himself. There was a little bit of a disconnect because he didn't do 10 years in prison, and he lived a very different life than I could. So there's a lot of problems that I faced that he could give me great advice on, but he couldn't directly relate to my experience. And so what I wanted to make available was a path that was not very rigid, that was somewhat subjective because all of our journeys are different and we're all different, but a path from this point in life where we've reached a really low point and we're trying to change to success. And success can look different for all of us. And I noted that a couple of key things were really important on my journey. And some of those things were community. A big one was mentorship. A big one was belief in myself and other people who believed in me as well. And I wanted to create an environment where that was possible for anybody because it's really hard. And I have looked for ways in which this is not true, but I have yet to meet somebody who's come from an experience like I've come from and made it out to the other side and not just wanted to reach their hand right back and pull somebody else out. And I wanted there to be a structure for this, and I wanted it to happen well, and I wanted it to be informed primarily by people with lived experience.
Incredible. And I really love the way that you've described this first mentor that you had. So, having the experience that you have had, what are some qualities that you feel like creates an excellent mentor?
Yeah. Empathy is probably the biggest one. Patience is a huge one. And um, a particular brand of leadership is important here. The ability to lead from the front or be in the trenches. One of the reasons that I respect my current mentor and the founder of our gym so much is that if the floor, and even though he's got lots of things on his plate that are way more important than mopping the floor, and even though there's lots of people immediately in the environment that should be mopping the floor or that are the better person for the job, he's just going to go ahead and do it. And I think if you don't recognize that in your mentor, if you don't recognize that they would do the things that they're asking you to do, it there feels like there's some kind of disconnect.
I totally agree. It's you see that they are disintegrating a hierarchy of tasks. They're not above doing something. If something needs to get done, they do it. Yeah, I like that too.
Yeah, this isn't the exact same thing, but skin in the game is important. So another way to say this is if I was looking for a business coach, I wouldn't want somebody who only understood the theory of business. I would want somebody who had created a successful business themselves.
Mm-hmm. What would you tell someone who might be interested in joining this gym or community? What would you share with them?
Yeah, I would say that, and here's something that we didn't touch on. I would say that it's going to be harder than you want it to be, and we love attrition. And if you're okay with that, if you're okay that this is going to be a difficult thing, come on through. If you're looking for the highest expression of this, if you're looking to enter the organization at the highest levels of leadership, which we believe is possible for anybody, leadership is a teachable skill, and we're a very inclusive place, maybe much more inclusive than I've painted the picture of us being. We have a space for everybody, and we want everybody at all times to know that they can walk through the gate of our gym and just hang out. However, if some of the things that I've said about like, oh, I could do anything that I wanted to do, which at the organization feels less like this, like Barney and Friends kind of like feel good, pat on the head thing, and feels very much more like, wow, like I have a lot that I need to change about myself, or I have a lot of capacity that I need to grow into, and it's going to take a long time and a lot of work. Then on that level, we found that it's actually better to try to talk people out of the program.
Seeing or expressing that something is aligned for them. And that's supporting someone in success.
Right.
Yeah. Awesome. At this time, I think I'm going to open it up to our community to ask questions as well. So just restating to anyone that's on the call or anyone that wasn't here earlier, if you're on your desktop, there's a black bar at the bottom and you can put your questions into the Q&A. And if it doesn't work for you accessibly, you're welcome to put it in the chat as well. And we'll direct the questions to Campbell. And while people are starting to gather their questions, there was one earlier that I had a question about it too. Were you reunited with your adoptive father or your biological father?
Adoptive father.
Adoptive father. Okay. Okay. Cool. Very cool. Are you still in connection with him?
I am now.
That's beautiful.
Yeah, we've developed a mutual respect for one another that neither of us thought we would.
Change. Okay, we got a question coming in. Great. What's the best advice you can give to someone mentoring those with justice impacted experiences?
Yeah, that's a great question. And one that I would reframe to say that I think that mentoring somebody with justice impacted experience isn't that different from mentoring anybody else. It requires that you put yourself in their shoes and are available for them at all times. And one edge that I have as a mentor is sometimes I'll want people to make progress faster. And I'll just be like, yo, you should have gotten this thing by now. What's up? And maybe I'll put myself in their shoes, and that's not quite fair, rather than meeting them where they're at, if that makes sense. So one, I don't know, trick is the wrong word to use, but I'll do this drill where that I see from my perspective, the behavior that I perceive that is hurting them, and I'll try to fit an age group to that. And so then if I have a person that I'm mentoring that's, for example, making bad choices, but I really believe in them and the potential and where they can go, rather than getting frustrated, I'll try to be like, oh, yo, this cat's acting like he's 13 years old, or this cat's really acting like he's 5 years old, and he's never had a loving and supportive community around him. And then so I'll try to address it from that, and I'll try to look at the support that that person needs and build that up around them so that they grow in maturity, and then it's not a guarantee, but then hopefully their behavior changes.
Thank you. Yeah, just, tying it up as well, and just saying that meeting people where they're at. I really love that. And just giving the spaciousness to understand. Next question. Where do you see DEUCE Community in 5 to 10 years? And what does the organization need to execute those goals?
Yeah, that's a phenomenal question. I go to sleep every night thinking about this. 5 to 10 years, I see we currently have housing for our participants. So we originally, I don't want to go down too big of a tangent, but we originally said that what we do really well is we do leadership development. And that's the thing that we want to, entrepreneurial development. That's the thing that we want to focus in on. And we have tons of partners who do lots of great work, and we don't want to do it. We don't want to do therapy. We don't want to do housing. We don't want to do any wraparound services. And then we started losing a ton of guys to hostile, negative home environments. And we realized, like, man, we gotta support these people outside of just the context of work, mentorship, the gym. And so we started housing. I would like to expand that so that anyone in our program has a safe home environment. I would like to expand some of our wraparound services. And then I would like to expand the physical location of the gym to include a community center. So one of the cool things about our for-profit business is that any a piece of equity in the gym. And I would like that to be true for the nonprofit as well. So for example, I would like participants in our program to be able to have equity in that community center, and I would like them to run enterprises out of it. One way that this is developing is several men in our program are starting a meal prep company. And though we're funding that operation, but they're going to own the company and they're going to make all the money from it, and we'll give them all the support and all the guidance. I would like more things like that to be possible, because this isn't a slug at any other programs or any other method or style of doing things. But one of the things that I've been frustrated at in the industry or in life in general for people who are system, substance, and housing impact is it feels like there's a very real ceiling. If it feels like I can only get this like minimum wage job, or I can only get my CDL and I have to be stuck at a certain level for forever, well, I want to do that. If I called shots on the yard, like maybe I want to call shots in business too. It'd seem kind of silly to just regress for the rest of my life. I want the future of DEUCE Community to look like more economic, more social, more spiritual growth and opportunity for the people in our program, and for anybody who wants it.
That's incredible. I didn't know you had a housing program. That's so impactful.
Yeah, and we thought that the most impactful thing about our housing program would be the ability to provide that like safe home environment. But I think that we've learned that the most beneficial thing about it is actually behavior modeling. When people see others that are farther along than them, or maybe it's a bad way to phrase it, but when people see others who are where they would like to be, acting a certain way and ingraining certain habits, then things begin to change. Then the conversation starts to be like, oh, that's what I would have to do to get to that place. Like some of the men who come, it's a male only housing at the moment. Some of the men who come into our housing, like, haven't eaten a vegetable in a couple years, and or they haven't had a morning routine or a sleep schedule, or just things that probably everybody on this call would recognize as really important to their success and their fulfillment. They just haven't been exposed to things like that before.
And I want to restate the second part of the question too, because also what I love about webinars and podcasts is that we get to uplift other organizations too. So what does the organization need to execute those goals?
Yeah, the technical problem, that's the easy one. We need more money to be able to do that. The adaptive thing is we need to grow in a leadership capacity. So we need to be able to do more things. Right now, just transparently, our work feels like this very in the trenches thing. This very much like we're putting out fires all the time and we're figuring things out. And a lot of the day-to-day is like very technical and okay, like this happened, this person needs support, we're going to get it to them. We have to evolve into a higher version of the organization, of a higher version in ourselves, so we're able to create some distance between what's going on the ground to build out these higher level systems.
Excellent. Thank you. If you could mentor a version of your younger self, what are some of the things you might tell yourself? And what techniques might you use to try to break through?
That's a great question. You know, I'm not convinced that my younger self would listen to anything that I have to say. But I would let the younger version of myself know that he was okay for the person that he is. Something that I didn't feel for myself for a very long time, and I have done a lot to work through this, and it's an ongoing process, to be transparent. But I didn't love myself. I wasn't comfortable in my own skin. I didn't believe in myself or the things that I was capable of. If that would have been different, a different reality would have been different to me. And the techniques that I would have used, I would have put myself around positive support systems and positive people.
Beautiful. Thank you. And I think that connects to this next question as well, is do you have any programming that works with people who are still incarcerated to support their journey and development before release?
We do. We would like to build out more programs that are inside facilities. We offer education in a few facilities that partner with us. So we have a program called Coaches Prep 101 that's available to anyone who's system, substance, and housing impacted. And if you know anybody or you know participants, my email will be on this link. You can email me. We'd love to get that out. We have another course called Business Prep 101, which is Principles of Entrepreneurship. And then we have several courses on adaptive leadership, or, in short, developing. I spoke to the organization needing to evolve and become a better version of itself. It's how to do that as a person, how to develop more capacity. So we offer those educational programs to any facility inside those facilities. We mostly work with people who are at the end of their sentence in transitional housing facilities. So think of it as prison, but not prison. There's one partner in particular we have in downtown LA, South Central LA, called Amity Foundation. And they're a temporary housing facility for people at the end of their sentence. So these people can leave the facility with some guidance. So they have to get a pass approved. They have an ankle monitor. And it's many of these men and women who are our most successful interns, because they're in an environment that's still pretty strict, pretty regulated, but they have a little bit more freedom and they can earn the right to travel to and from the gym.
How do people get in contact with you?
Email is the best way, campbell@DEUCEGym.com. I'm fairly responsive. Give me 72 hours and you'll for sure hear back from me.
Okay, thank you. And how do people that are currently incarcerated or system impacted find these 3 amazing programs that you talked about?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So we're very, very interested in bringing more of these to the prison system. And the best way to do that, if somebody had like access to this talk right here, would be to send a letter to 110 Lincoln Boulevard, Venice, California, 90291. And I'll put that in the chat as well.
Okay. And then are they sending like a request for a proposal? Tell us more about the process.
Yeah, so they could. So these courses are delivered in video format. However, everything in life is made up and there's no real rules. So if we got a letter from an individual who just really wanted to make this thing happen, I would love to figure out a way to make that happen. And they were like, hey, like I don't have access to a laptop, can't do this internet thing. With several facilities, we've uploaded our programs onto Google Drive so that individuals can access those through like an I don't know anything about technology, but through an intranet, I think is the word. Okay, cool. I'm getting a nod, so I'll take that.
No, it's a surprising nod. I'm also not a tech or I'm a meme person. That's about the extent of my internet knowledge. Yeah.
Yeah, but I'd be really interested in figuring out a creative solution to get people access to those programs.
I love that. So just I'm hearing that you're committed to getting these programs to people, and the first step is to send you a letter.
Correct.
Fantastic. Do you have any plans to deliver this programming to women? And what kind of support do you need to do that?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. So our programs about a year ago saw the first inclusion of women. We're very interested in building these programs out. Some of what needs to happen is a greater capacity on our part for building networks inside the prison system with female prisons and with female units. Some of what needs to happen is we need to find a really great woman with lived experience to mentor other women in our program. It's just like very true that, and we see this a lot, is my experience inside of prison is I never saw anybody really be successful. Like the stories I would hear about people getting out was like such and such went back to the streets and made a lot of money or got busted again, or I would see people come in and out. So there was a whole lot of belief that real success or living a different life was really possible.
Mm.
I think the same is true for all of us. If we don't really see somebody that looks like us, that we can identify with doing the thing that we're trying to do, the goal feels more distant and more far off. I think one of the major hurdles in bringing our program to women is that we just don't have a female mentor with lived experience. I'd be very interested to find that person.
Okay, fantastic. And maybe this podcast will be an opportunity to find the perfect person. Yeah, put a call out. Yeah.
Speak it into existence. I'm about it.
Yeah. So questions can continue to come in, but I wanted to offer you an opportunity to speak to anything that hasn't been brought up today or hasn't been spoken to.
Yeah. I think the big one is that, you know, my obstacle in this is I'm just not articulate enough. And then also I think that visually I represent something. I'm a little bit of a meathead and I'm always in the gym. So I think that a lot of people can look at our program or look at my story and be like, oh, that's training, or it's all about the barbell, or it's like this thing that turns convicts into coaches, when in reality, our program is just about changing the way that men and women view themselves and the way that they interact with the world. It's like often people are like, what's the best thing that I could do? And part of me wants to go to like, I would say maybe this is a lower part, wants to be like, well, give us money, because part of my job for forever will be to fundraise and help develop our programs. But the most impactful thing I think people can do to get involved is to come to our programs or write a letter and connect with one of our participants and just have a conversation with those people. many of them have never experienced a positive and supportive community, many, if none of them. And we really see the real change and the real transformation happen inside of our programs when our participants realize that other people believe in them and that there's a support system around them. And then it becomes safe for them to take some risks. It becomes safe for them to enter our educational programs, and it becomes safe for them to show up. And maybe this was my experience. I had been told my whole life that I wasn't going to amount to anything, that like I was going to die in prison, I was going to die on the streets. And I just believed that that was true. And it wasn't until somebody started to treat me like that was not true, like a different reality could be different, that my behavior began to change. As I think it's the same. That's my experience, but I really do believe that it's the same for everybody in our program. If you wanted to have the biggest impact, or you wanted to get involved in the biggest way, it would be as simple as like just showing up and having a conversation with somebody and giving them support.
Thank you. One, I think that you're very articulate. I think that you've had beautiful messaging of this work and your journey. So I would just respectfully disagree that you're not articulate. I thought you've done a great job of talking about the mission and the work. And what I'm really seeing this kind of come full circle is that you have become the person that you wanted in your life.
Yeah, thank you. That means a lot.
Yeah. I see it. And then we have a question in here. Any success stories from DEUCE Community and how the model supported them? From the outside, I feel like you're a success story, right? Like you joined this community. Well, you joined the gym and you built the community. Like that is such deep success. But maybe talk about some other participants.
For sure. And I'm infinitely more proud of everybody else in our program before me. This could be a podcast all to its own, but we have our participant, one of our earliest graduates, David Gonzalez, and I'll just share a brief part of his story. David came from an environment that almost guaranteed that he would never be today where he is in life. And I'll let you just imagine what that's like. And without taking his story from him. And early on, when I was building this program, it felt like just a fantastical, like not a real thing, but something that I wanted to speak into the world, that one day I want one of the people in our program to make more money than me and be really well off and just be crushing it. And David did that within a very short amount of time. So we worked with David for about 9 months when he was in this transitional housing facility, Amity, and he is the brightest, most curious, biggest student, just hungriest guy I've ever met in my entire life. And my relationship with David has just been like brought more joy to my life than almost anything. And within a very short amount of time upon release, he had met a woman when he was in prison who he jokingly refers to as his new warden. And he says that because Cece provides the structure in his life that he needs to be successful. And they moved to San Francisco. So we were sad that David wasn't going to be in LA, like born and bred in LA. But he went to San Francisco, and that removed him from the environment that he grew up in, which was a very positive thing for him. And he also had the structure available to him. And I say this just to say that my role in David's story is very, very small. There's like a small friend, small mentor in his life. And he's got incredible potential. Within a very short amount of time of moving to San Francisco, he was afforded the opportunity to run a gym. And he was afforded this opportunity because the things that he learned at DEUCE he was able to implement at a gym he talked himself into a job at. And those things transformed that gym. So they thought David was magic. And then in the process of getting that job, he left another job that begged him to stay on in a consultancy position. They say, we just can't lose you. You're too good. And so within a very short amount of time after his release from prison, under a year, he was making $90,000 a year, living in the Bay Area, supporting a family. And when I first met David, he asked to be in the program. And like my initial thoughts were like, this guy's not going to make it. He's just like got too many ties to the streets. His history's too deep. Like he still had a lot of contact with people who are just not going to be very good for him. But I'm going to give everybody a chance, and I gave David a chance. And very early on in his journey, he realized that like, hey, like this is just a better life for me. It's what I need to do.
Really beautiful story of his own kind of soul retrieval, and what he walked away from was really just walking towards what he wanted. And that sounds like such a big move for him, to move away from the place that he knew, the contacts that he knew, and then to the Bay, like one of the most expensive places in the whole world. It's scary. And it sounds like he's just flying. That's incredible.
Yeah, he's mentoring other people up in the Bay Area right now, and it's really fulfilling for me to watch. Again, I genuinely feel like I played a very small role in David's life and his success, but it's very fulfilling for me to watch this impact that I have on him just expand and get bigger and bigger as he helps more and more people.
Beautiful. And I have one last question for you before we end our time here today. Can you talk about the importance of belonging?
For sure. For me, most of the decisions that I made early in my life that were detrimental to my growth and my progress came with a really positive intent. I just wanted to belong to a group of people. I just wanted to feel loved and like I was worthwhile, and like I had people around me who supported me and believed in me and thought that I was a dope human. And I chased that in really unhealthy ways for a long time. I think that often it gets really easy for us to forget that that's just like a basic human need and a basic human desire. There's an interesting social, maybe this is more prevalent to me based on where I am in Los Angeles, but there's a really interesting social experiment somebody introduced to me, and that's like, what if every time you walk by somebody who is housing impacted, you smile at them and gave them a greeting, you gave them a "what's up, man," or a "hello," or "it's really good to see you," or a "how's your day going?" And what impact would that have on the community, and what impact would that have on the world? And like on a more micro level, just like, what would that do to that person's day who gets walked by 100 or 1,000 times a day, and people don't look at them or like do a weird face thing or try to ignore them? And sometimes on a micro level, that experiment goes really well and will brighten my day as well. And sometimes it doesn't go well, but there's like other factors I think we can all acknowledge are involved. And I think that's a very small experiment to show that like everybody wants belonging, everybody wants to feel loved, everybody wants to feel like they're included in a thing. And the experiment just doesn't have to stop with the homeless guy that you walk by every day. It could be something bigger.
Thank you. And I think you're speaking to something. So it's biological. It is belonging is part of survival. We need it.
For sure.
Thank you so much for taking the time to share your personal journey today. And we absolutely love you. We love DEUCE Gym and all of the positive impact that you're having on your community and beyond. Thank you so much for being here and talking to our community about mentorship and belonging. We'll definitely drop the links in this episode to how you can stay in contact with DEUCE Gym and DEUCE Community, and how you can write a letter to 110 Lincoln Boulevard, Venice, California, 902 888-291 if you are interested in receiving any kind of programming or mentorship while you are currently incarcerated. So thank you again so much for being an amazing and important part of this community and supporting people that are system impacted.
Thank you, Blair.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.